Hello, everybody. Now that KDOT is no longer berating my fellow countrymen, I finally feel safe as a Canadian to post another good old-fashioned game development video. I say it all the time, and today's no exception. I'm making this kind of Kenshi Dwarf Fortress-inspired video game, which you're looking at right now. It's an RPG in an open world with a simulated ecosystem full of fantasy creatures. Anyways, last time I said I was going to make the world beautiful, which was probably a bit of an overstatement, and in response YouTube sent me an email asking me if I planned to suck-start a shotgun, which to me felt a little bit rude. Now, recently we'd switched from the vast empty plain in the older game builds to a vast empty hillside we're generating procedurally. It's infinite possibilities in the loosest and most boring sense possible. That'll take some time to get right, but I've got no publisher or stakeholders, so I've got all the time in the world, or at least the next few months before the economy collapses. I started by modeling a couple props. I made this tree, which I'm not particularly proud of, and this rock, which I'm actually very, very proud of, and I'm actually pretty sensitive about it as well, so please don't mention the rock to me if you don't have anything nice to say. Look, the props aren't perfect, but we'll get there, assuming YouTube was wrong about me, of course. The point is, we need something to place so we could start the code for our procedural generation. Things are a bit more complex than just adding trees to our scene because we need to account for the chunk saving and loading, so we need a system to handle that as well. We'll generate separate layers of noise to denote areas that have trees, and then place them there if the point isn't below sea level. Here I have a very different noise from the terrain, showing blobs that will represent our forests. I added the props to a class that represents a biome as well, so in the future we can generate a biome map and only place props belonging to that biome. We'll save a little information about the prop to each chunk, randomizing its scale and rotation a bit, and reserve placing props at those locations when the chunk loads. Here's a first pass distribution across the world. As it stands, we're not handling varying density at all, so we end up with these very inorganic forests, but at some point we'll use multiple layers of noise to create a more organic effect. But this at least lets us stress test the chunk loading with a ton of different props. I did a similar thing with a different layer of noise for the stones. Now we're getting hundreds of props in some chunks and we can see how the loading holds up. And actually, it's much less impactful than I would have thought, which is great. Here with all these rocks and trees, the chunks are still loading immediately, and that's even when creating a bunch of game objects at the time of load, which could be optimized. I took another crack at the water shader as well, just for the time being, so it looks a little more like liquid than a thick gas. It's still a long way off, and I'm certainly not sold on the aesthetic just yet, but I think you can agree that it's an improvement over what we had before. We're not done cluttering our scene yet though. The ground was looking awfully bare, so I fixed it with a bit of grass. This is another area we'll have to spend some time with in the future to make sure that we have the look and performance we want. You'd be surprised what a rabbit hole video game grass is. There's 100 different solutions out there at least. And sometimes I wonder what the f*** I'm doing with my life exactly. Anyways, we also ought to do something about the ground texture. As it stands, we're just projecting a single texture downwards onto the mesh on a single plane. This causes the texture to stretch when the terrain is steep, which you can see happening here, because essentially we're going to have less detail the more vertical space we cover in a given area. We can avoid this by instead projecting a texture from multiple planes, blending it together at the seams. This removes the stretching, but it also affords us another opportunity for aesthetics. We can project a different image on the new planes entirely, giving steep sections of the map a rocky texture instead of grass. We can use different textures based on the height of the terrain as well, making cliff tops rocky and beaches sandy, which adds a little detail to our terrain. Of course, none of these textures are final either, but this is just sort of getting the system in place. Lastly, I quickly updated the new AI to actually animate the characters underneath, which isn't functioning as well as it was with the old AI, because the characters slide around a bit, but I only did this to get an idea of what a scene full of characters would look like now that we have some three-dimensionality to our world. Here we've got our beautiful little Patreon subscriber angels scampering around. Bless their hearts. Anyways, this felt like a big moment for the game because I can imagine what it will look like one day. When you compare it to how far it's come and picture how far it can go, I really think it's shaping up into something pretty cool. Special thanks to all my Patreon subscribers, you guys are the best. I've got some more free time coming up here soon, so expect a shorter wait than last time. And that's it for now. Peace out, everybody. Oh, and fucking subscribe, you suckers.